Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Malcolm, for getting us started. It's been a real interesting year for all of us, and this BioBlitz is no different. We've been focusing this year's BioBlitz on the SU lightning fire footprint, and it's definitely not typical, as Malcolm mentioned. We focus on a 400,000 acre fire footprint over the course of 2 weeks, as opposed to one place for the course of a day. And today we'll have speakers talking about their unique experiences that they had all over this fire footprint, stretching from Mount Diablo's southeast slopes all the way to Del Puerto Canyon. And I hope all of you are extremely excited to hear about the variety of topics before you today. I know I'm real excited about it. And as Malcolm just mentioned, this is really, this focal point we'll be discussing is really just a snapshot. It's really just scratching the surface to the extent of the biodiversity found in the Diablo Range. So this incredible 2-week study is really a catalyst for a multi-year research project. And it's just a real thrilling and exciting, incredible wilderness area we have in our backyard. And there's a lot to learn about it. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, California Native Plant Society, for partnering with us with this. So enjoy the show. Thank you so much.
Could we ask everybody who's not speaking to turn off their mics? We're hearing dogs in the background. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. So my name is Denise Castro, and I'm Save on Diablo's Education and Outreach Associate. Like mentioned before, we couldn't do Save on Diablo's usual 24-hour BioBlitz because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, we went for a safer approach with the dispersed 2-week-long event from April 17th to May 1st. And this dispersed BioBlitz covered public parks and roads in the footprint of the nearly 400,000 acre SCU Lightning Complex that took place back in August of 2020. And the series of almost 20 fires is the third largest wildfire in California history. The fire footprint extends from east of Mount Diablo in Morgan Territory, Round Valley, and Los Vaqueros area, which is called the Deer Zone Fire, and goes down as far south as Henry Coe State Park and Pacheco Pass. We had amazing attendance this year, and with the help of the California Native Plant Society's Fire Followers campaign, we gathered thousands of observations from across the northern Diablo Range. Within the 2-week period, we collected over 2,500 observations, many of which were uploaded onto iNaturalist and eBird from over 100 observers. So we've seen these observations, and there's some seriously cool stuff popping up all across the northern Diablo Range in these burn sites. The Fire Followers campaign that the California Native Plant Society is running is still happening and will continue to happen for the next few years. And they're focusing on all the 2020 fires across the state, but they have a specific iNaturalist project for the SU Lightning Complex. And currently there are over 4,500 observations on this project and about 240 observers, which is amazing. While Save Mount Diablo's 2021 BioBlitz has come to an end, I highly encourage everyone to keep visiting public preserves and roads that the fire has swept through. And you can find some burn site suggestions on our BioBlitz webpage. And keep uploading observations because different plants and animals appear at different times of the year. So you never know what kind of cool things you'll find when you're out there. And it's just there's amazing places to go and check out. So Save Mount Diablo also has an ongoing project called the Diablo Range Revealed, which involves a series of posts, videos, and photo galleries. The project covers the impact of the SU Lightning Complex, and it's a great opportunity to explore the northern Diablo Range and track what kind of cool fire followers pop up. You can follow the adventures on our website. There are lots of amazing informational posts with tips on the best locations to see some of the most amazing wildflower blooms in the region and other great tips like that. And just to reiterate a few tips, please keep your video and audio off. If you have any questions, please write those down in the chat feature, and there'll be time at the end of all the presentations for a Q&A. Also, this event is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Save Mount Diablo's BioBlitz webpage for everyone to see. So without further ado, let's get started with Amy Patton, Rare Plant Treasure Hunt Manager from the California Native Plant Society. I'm gonna stop share.
Hi, Denise. Thanks so much for having me today. Just get my screen share going. So my name is Amy, and I'm part of the Rare Plant Program for California Native Plant Society. And for my job, I work with scientists and volunteers and land managers to look for rare plant populations. So we try and find new populations that haven't been recorded before, or look for populations that haven't had any monitoring or other types of record keeping or updates in a long time. So throughout this BioBlitz, I was able to spend a lot of time surveying around the summit of Mount Hamilton. If you're not familiar with the area, Mount Hamilton's only about 20 miles east of San Jose, but it feels like you're on a different planet or in a different time when you're up there because it's so remote and so quiet and has a beautiful view of the whole South Bay area. It's really amazing. At the summit of Mount Hamilton is the Lake Observatory, which is kind of one of the main landmarks. And although it's closed right now, it's typically accessible to the public. And it's really fun to visit when it is open. I've been really interested in this area because the Hamilton Range is kind of a subset of the Diablos that's geographically isolated. And it has a lot of unusual rock and soil types like the Franciscan melange and serpentine soils. And many of our rare plants are adapted to special rock and soil types. So between that and the isolation of kind of this Mount Hamilton area, there are a lot of plants that are endemic to Mount Hamilton, so only found within that surrounding area. So really exciting botanically, lots of cool things to see. And the fire burned pretty close to the observatory property. So I've been working with the observatory staff to do some surveys in the area. So I wanted to show you a few of the cool plants that I've been seeing there during the BioBlitz. The Mount Diablo Phacelia is a small and not very impressive looking Phacelia that is only found between Mount Diablo and San Benito County.
Oh, wow, this is one of the ones that I sent a picture of.
Oh, yay.
Oh, how exciting.
Yeah, this is really special. And we're working on seed banking it this year too. So all of the observations of this plant are really helpful. And so this record from the observatory was last updated in the 1940s by Alice Eastwood. So hadn't had an official update in a long time, but one of the astronomers who works at the observatory had refound this population, only about 10 plants, but we were able to go check it out and document it. So that was a really exciting old record to update. Mount Hamilton Lamatian is another one that's endemic to only Mount Hamilton area. It has one of my favorite scientific names of Lamatium observatorium. And most of the known plants of this species are found right beneath the domes of the observatory. And it's in the carrot family. So although it's not much to look at, the vegetation looks kind of like a carrot top that you would get in the grocery store. So this plant's really special. I was excited to see it blooming during the BioBlitz, and I'm hoping to find some new populations of it in kind of the coming weeks and months in the burn area. Bitterroot or Lewisia rediviva is not a rare plant, but it's so beautiful and it's one of my favorite flowers. So I wanted to share this one. It's found in scattered small numbers throughout California, and it grows in bare soil or rock outcrops. And the flowers can be hot pink or pale white, and they smell amazing. So if you ever see them, highly recommend getting down there and smelling them. And Lewisias are one of our native succulents, so they're adapted to grow in a lot of hot and dry areas. Santa Clara thorn mint is another rare plant that loves serpentine soil and Franciscan talus. It has these really cool spiky bracts around the flowers, which is where it gets the name thorn mint from, and it is in the mint family as well. So found some of this on the side of the road in the burn area, kind of near the observatory. Another cool one, which is having a really good year despite the dry conditions, is the Serpentine Lepto Siphon, which is this tiny, beautiful pink flower. And a few weeks ago, as we were driving up towards the summit, got these beautiful displays of kind of hot pink against the hillsides. So this one's found in open areas kind of like more like open talus and rock outcrops. And a lot of people have been seeing it around Henrico and stuff like that. So that one's still doing pretty good despite the lackluster conditions otherwise. My favorite botanical find so far of 2021 is this population of Mount Hamilton Coreopsis. So this is another plant that's endemic to Mount Hamilton area. It's in the sunflower family, and it lives on these Franciscan talus slopes. And living in talus is kind of a tenuous existence because talus is really prone to disturbance. So sometimes populations of plants that live in talus can blink out with time if there's too much disturbance or conditions aren't favorable. A really cool feature of our flora in California is that most of our plants are adapted to living with wildfire, and one of the adaptations is having a seed bank that persists in the soil for a really long time. So sometimes we can see rare plants come back even up to 100 years after a fire if they are fire followers or need some kind of minimal disturbance to continue. So this population of the Mount Hamilton Coreopsis hadn't been seen at the observatory since 1993, and it had actually been looked for in a previous rare plant treasure hunt, but no one had seen it since the 90s. And this is one that I was really interested in trying to re-find in the burn area because most populations of this plant are not open or in areas that are accessible to the public. So I really wanted to try and find it in the observatory, which would be an area where we can come back and study it and monitor it. So I was really excited to find about 200 plants coming out of the burn area. You can see some of the ash on that left-hand picture. And it was just a really exciting find. So I was really happy to find that one. And last but not least, also found a rare lizard. Blaineville's horn lizard is found in the coast ranges throughout central and southern California, and they've faced really massive.
Okay, you called me on the morning of.
Oh, sorry, I was getting a comment there. I think it cut out. So I'll just keep going. So this horn lizard used to be really common in Central California in the Bay Area, but it's declined a lot due to habitat fragmentation and development, and Argentine ants displace the native ants that it eats. So it's always really special to see them. And we found one last week while coming back from a survey in Henrico, right at the summit of the mountain in the observatory. So that is all I have for today. And if you have questions about rare plants or the Fire Followers project, then feel free to reach out.
Could I remind people, including Monica, Lynn, and Margaret, to turn off your audio? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And up next, we have Scott Hine, Naturalist and Land Committee Chair from Save Mount Diablo.
Okay, I should be sharing my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we did something a little bit different for the BioBlitz this year. I actually joined Joan and Bruce Hamilton on a 3-day, 2-night backpacking trip into the burn footprint in the Ohlone Wilderness, the East Bay Regional Park District Ohlone Wilderness. Joan is working on a series of new Audible guides for our Diablo Range Revealed initiative, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity to work both on that project as well as on the BioBlitz. We didn't actually reach the edge of the burn footprint until the middle of our second day of hiking. However, our second night's camp shown here was right in the middle of it. And for those who know the Ohlone Trail in the Ohlone Wilderness, this is the Doe Canyon Horse Camp near Rose Peak. And if you look off in the background to the left, you can see Mount Diablo rising above the low clouds in the background for geographic reference. This is a map of the SCU Lightning Complex fire from the Bay Area News Group. And the area that we approximately covered during our backpacking trip is the red oval above the Santa Clara County line up at the top left of the map here. One of the things we've learned is that these big blobs of red on the fire coverage maps you see don't really tell you very much about the nature of the actual fire within its boundaries. In the case of the portion of the Ohlone Wilderness we were able to explore, the fire really appeared to be fairly low intensity in most places with only a few signs of high intensity burn areas. So the big red blob isn't necessarily helpful other than a sort of overview of where the fire occurred. More than 4,500 acres were reported to have been burned in the Ohlone Wilderness. Today, at least to the casual visitor, it's looking fairly normal. In fact, as you can tell from this photo, it was actually hard for us finding the fire footprint in the grassland, which appeared to be largely recovered from the fire. Chaparral areas were still mostly bare and there were some burned trees, but grassland and woodland were covered with flowers in many places. The first signs we had that we had entered the burn footprint were the scorched lower branches of some of the oaks. And then in a few places, there were signs of more intense fire where whole trees had burned. But you can see the grassland in the background looks fairly normal at this spot. You can see off in the distance here behind the hillside of poppies is bare ground that hasn't come back, so a more intense fire burned in that location. Once we were in the burn footprint, we then began recording our observations for the iNaturalist project, and this is Joan recording observations for us. And really, this is typical of what we saw hiking along these grassland hillsides through the burn footprint, abundant wildflowers often blanketing both sides of the trail, popcorn flower in this case. And here there's fiddleneck, popcorn flower, California poppy, and blue dicks all sort of blanketing this hillside. And this otherwise unremarkable looking stock pond was actually teeming with life, and this was right in the middle of the burn area. We sat for about 20 minutes and observed a Diablo Range garter snake, California newts coming up to the surface to breathe, several damselflies, a western pond turtle, and a likely red-legged frog that we were able to identify in that period of time. So a lot of life in this small pond. And this is Bruce Hamilton photographing a nice patch of baby blue eyes near the scar of a burned tree that had fallen. I inserted this photo of an oak to remind myself to mention that two of the most abundant bird species we saw in the burn area were acorn woodpecker and band-tailed pigeon. And I wondered perhaps if it was just easy foraging for acorns that dropped from the oak trees as a result of the fire, because they were more abundant than I've ever seen in other places. And other bird highlights in the burn area were two golden eagles, peregrine falcon, migrant western tanagers, although it's unlikely that the burn had anything to do with the presence of any of these species, at least at this point in time. Bruce and Joan are backpacking in Henry Coe State Park this week, continuing their work on the Diablo Range Revealed project, so they couldn't join in this debrief. However, I thought I would conclude by relaying some thoughts from Joan, actually questions more than thoughts. She said, after a trip to Morgan Territory, I got to thinking about the difference between these two Diablo Range parks. A park filled with grasslands is going to bounce back much faster than one with a lot of chaparral. We had a hard time even finding the fire footprint in Ohlone, but why were the burned grasslands of Ohlone so much more flower filled than those of Morgan Territory? Why were there so many species sprouting in Morgan Territory's burned chaparral and so few in the burned chaparral we saw in Ohlone? And perhaps we'll gain some more insight into these questions as we continue this BioBlitz project for the next couple of years. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yep,
Up next, we have Wes Gray, Natural Resource Manager from Henry Coe State Park.
All right, hello everyone. I think if you stop sharing your screen, it'll let me.
Yep, that's what I'm trying to get to here. I have too many windows open. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
All right, let's see if I can get this. How does that look? Is it working for everyone?
Everybody, before Wes gets started, could I remind people again, we keep having people coming in with their audio turned on, and please be diligent. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, I'm the natural resource manager for Henrico State Park, and I'm going to talk about the SCU fire and how it affected Henrico in this particular fire. So our people were showing some of the maps of the burn complex, but here's a little more close-up view of Henrico. So it is the second largest state park in California, the largest in Northern California. The total acreage is 87,000 acres. And 55,000 acres burned in the fire. So a really good chunk of it. But where on the news, you heard a lot about the devastation of fires, particularly around like Big Basin State Park. The story was much different at Henrico. The fire was largely beneficial to the ecology, and in this burned area of the park, there was essentially no structures. So we really didn't lose anything of irreplaceable value, but the overall fire intensity was relatively low. And yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we saw and did out there. So here's a photo of typically kind of some of the fire behavior that we saw out at Co, where I would describe it as kind of an understory burn, where it burned the grass and the shrubs, but it didn't really get up into a lot of the canopy of the trees. So a lot of these oaks are just doing fine. We did lose quite a few of the pine trees, but that's typical within a fire like this, and they recover pretty quickly. So I think I've even got a video here where you can kind of see where, you know, this was the front of the fire in the middle of the SCU fire at one point in time, and the intensity was not, you know, overwhelming. It just kind of was burning at a slow pace, consuming all the understory fuels, but not really getting up into the canopy of the trees. And here's kind of after the fire, where you got a lot of black on the ground, but still a lot of green up into the trees. So, you know, this is a pretty good fire as far as I'm concerned for the ecology of Co. And then overall, the response from CAL FIRE was really ideal from our perspective in a park management, where a lot of the burn scar within Co was the same that burned in 2007 in the Lick fire. So there wasn't an overabundance of fuel. So once the fire hit Co, it was it slowed down, and it was at a manageable speed. So CAL FIRE was able to come up with a plan where they used all the existing roads within Co to create a burn perimeter. And that's really good because they didn't have to cut a bunch of new dozer line through kind of virgin territory within the park. So they were able to use our existing park road infrastructure, improve that, and then do a back burning operation where they lit off the road, and then the fire that they lit met up with the wildfire, creating a black area. And that, you know, that's the ideal situation where you stop the fire without having to create a bunch of bare mineral earth with dozers. And here's kind of a map of you can see that that's one of our park roads, and then another one of our park roads, and the burn perimeter went right up through it. And that's the case all throughout Henrico, where it burned right up to one of our roads. And then here's kind of an example of some of the burn intensity we saw, where it didn't even consume all of the chaparral and scrub, where it just kind of would burn part of it and then just kind of burn itself out and just stop. So that's, you know, what we would consider a mosaic, and really kind of an ideal condition, where if we were to light a prescribed burn in this area as a planned situation, we would plan for a burn just like this, where you create kind of a diversity of burned and unburned areas. So now there'll be different age classes when this vegetation is recovering. We'll have some older vegetation with a lot of new. Again, it's more diversity, you know, and that'll increase the overall health of the ecology. This area kind of burned a little bit hotter, but even within here, you still have a lot of unburnt green vegetation. And again, this is kind of a pretty ideal condition. Even today, a lot of these stumps are resprouting from the base. And I really think that the area is recovering just as I would expect. And we're not really having any erosion problems. There's a lot of fire following wildflowers, so overall pretty good condition. And this is one of our ridge lines where we have ponderosa pines, and we actually designed a project where we were looking at to protect these pines, clearing the understory around them to protect them from a devastating wildfire that would burn through and get up into the canopy. Without even getting to it, this fire produced that condition in a lot of these areas. So yeah, again, the fire was meeting kind of a lot of our management objectives without even, without even our help. And then, like I mentioned, that CAL FIRE didn't have to put a lot of dozer lines through. They mostly did hand work, and then we were able to use our own state park crews to come and do a lot of the suppression repair ourselves. So we were able to kind of fix it to our standard while getting kind of reimbursed from CAL FIRE. So it was a really good partnership, and while the fires of this past year were really bad for some parks and communities, it actually worked out pretty well for Henry Cohen as far as the ecology is concerned. And yeah, this is just some of the follow-up work that we've been working on, doing some pile burns of some of the slash material that was created as a result of the fire, and we're still kind of working through to fix up some of the cut material that was left behind from the firefighters. But yeah, overall the ecology of Co is recovering pretty nicely. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Wes. Next up, we have David King, amateur naturalist, and I'll be sharing my screen for that.
Good afternoon. Let me see if I can figure this thing out.
Let me just share my screen real quick. There we go. Is that visible?
Okay. Are you seeing a map now?
Oh, let me stop sharing then.
Okay, apparently I can't do this from here, so I'm just going to talk through what I
Oh wait,
did.
David, I'm so sorry. I thought I was sharing. Go ahead and try again.
Okay, let me try again. Well, I'll try sharing my screen. And okay, is this working here?
No.
All right, then I'll do it without that. I'll just talk. I put lots of pictures on iNaturalist if you want to see them. But basically, I did my observations from along Highway 130, starting in Frank Raines Park in Stanislaus County. Parked there, loaded up my bicycle and traveled along the highway. Bicycle was a good way to go because I could cover a lot of ground and yet still move slowly enough to stop wherever I wanted to observe things. So I took a lot of pictures of different plants that I depended on other people on iNaturalist to identify. And my particular interest was in ants. So there were lots of Baromesser Andre nests all along the road. Stopped and took pictures of those ants. You can see them on my photograph here. Also saw Formica mochi. Unfortunately, also found Argentina ants and a variety of other ants along the way. Took a lot of pictures of birds also. So moving very slowly over Highway 130 to the junction and then south through San Antonio Valley, which was not burned. Didn't see a lot of reptiles other than some turtles off the side of the road. I thought I might see more snakes and lizards, which I usually see when I'm out in that area. And for large mammals other than horses and cows, I saw one coyote. Ended up going by moonlight up to the top of Mount Hamilton. Hoped to see something in the night there, did not. Came down, a few rabbits running in front of my headlights and then back to Frank Raines. In the morning, I went out and took some more pictures, mostly of birds, and ended up making roughly 120 observations posted on iNaturalist. This was my third BioBlitz, and I hope to continue to participate in the future. That'll finish me up.
Thank you so much, David. Next up, we have Seth Adams, Land Conservation Director of Save Mont Diablo.
Seth, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm juggling screens here and trying to get the right one in place. But I'm still not accomplishing it.
Are you able to share your screen, Seth?
I'm working on it. Sorry, this has not happened to me before.
Seth, would you like me to come back to you?
Please do.
Okay. Next up, we have Patrick Colar from Golden Eagle Study, Field Coordinator for the USGS. And then, Patrick, are you ready?
I think I'm ready. I'm having some problems with Zoom as well, but we'll see if this works.
I'll go ahead and share my screen.
All right.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. As Denise mentioned, I am a wildlife biologist and the field research coordinator with the U.S. Geological the U.S. Geological Survey. We've been conducting a broad-scale study of golden eagle territory occupancy and reproduction throughout the northern Diablo Range. Since 2014, we've been surveying from about the Carquinez Strait down to Highway 152, kind of East Bay, down to San Jose to I-5 on the other side. Covering a large area. In 2020, we were actually kind of surprised at the extent of the wildfires. The SCU complex burned about a third of our entire study area. Based on the surveys that we've been conducting over the past few years and some historical information that we had, we estimate that about 80 pairs of golden eagles probably overlap with the burn area. So we've been interested to learn more about the response of these territorial pairs. I had the opportunity to access the Connolly Ranch during the BioBlitz, which is a great opportunity. We had some information on that area going back to the mid to late 1990s from some earlier studies that were done in the area. We hadn't visited that area since about 2015, 2016. So I was really interested to see if those territorial pairs that we knew of were still around, if they had any nests. In our surveys elsewhere in the Diablo Range, we've seen a lot of nests, nest trees that have burned down. This is predominantly a tree nesting population. So on the Connolly Ranch, I was able to use that historical information and check some of those known territory locations while I was out BioBlitzing. And it was really interesting. I was able to find one pair of eagles that had a young nestling that they were feeding. Another pair was working on a new nest. I think a couple of their historical nests survived the fire. And then there are a couple other pairs I wasn't quite able to figure out during that time. So it was really a great opportunity. The picture that I have on the screen here, you might be thinking that's not a golden eagle. And I have this up because the BioBlitz represents a pretty great opportunity for even people like me. I'm a professional wildlife biologist. I get paid to be outside and observe nature. I'm out from middle of December until the end of July, pretty much 5 days a week. And I'm usually so focused on my study species and getting the work done that I rarely have the opportunity to really appreciate the other things that are out there. Occasionally I will try to look for some interesting species, but very rarely do I have a chance to really stop and smell the flowers and look at the flowers and see what's on them. So I took this opportunity while I was BioBlitzing to look around a little bit more, and I was quite interested to see this little insect pollinating some flowers, and using iNaturalist looked it up. And for me, at least for a biologist, it was really fun to just kind of research a little bit more about Longhorn Moths. If you could kind of see, I don't know if I can use a pointer here, but you can see the antennae on this moth are about the size of its body, maybe even a little bit longer. It was really kind of fascinating. So I had a great time, learned a lot. I was able to accomplish everything that I wanted to, check on the historical golden eagle territories. I'm hoping that I could go back and monitor those with the permission from the landowners. And I was able to observe some other aspects of nature that I wouldn't normally be able to stop and look at while I'm out and about. But I think I'm gonna make that time and that effort now going forward, especially in the burn area. We're hoping to see how the golden eagles respond, and I'm gonna try to keep on uploading my observations to iNaturalist as well while I'm out there. So with that, I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Seth, are you ready to go? Or do you need more
I
time?
am ready to go. Do you see a full screen or two images?
We see a full screen.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. I want you to imagine planning an event when you didn't know if people could attend, and if you didn't know that the venues will be open. So I want to thank the Mary Bauerman Science and Research Committee for overseeing this event, and especially Denise Castro for organizing it, along with Sean Burke and myself. When Save Mount Diablo was first formed in 1971, we were focused on Diablo's main peaks, and about 7,000 acres or about 10 square miles had been protected. Today, over 120,000 acres around Mount Diablo's main peaks have been preserved, and we've protected about 75% of what we consider important north of Altamont Pass. So that's Highway 680 on the left and Highway 580 and Altamont Pass on the bottom there. And we've known for decades that if Mount Diablo is cut off from the rest of the Diablo Range, it'll lose a lot of its distinctiveness And so we've expanded the area within which we work many times, across Marsh Creek to Black Diamond Mines, east to Morgan Territory, further east to Los Vaqueros, south into the Tasahara area. A few years ago, we began planning our next expansion further down the Diablo Range. And the problem for everyone is that almost no one knows what the Diablo Range is, and no one has a true sense of its size and scale. It stretches from Mount Diablo and Carquinez Strait north 150 miles across 12 counties. It's really the watershed divide between the San Joaquin River and the Salinas and some of the Bay Area creeks. The watershed divide is often the county line between the east and the west various counties. So we expanded our area further south from southeastern Alameda to the Santa Clara County line to include part of the San Joaquin, southwestern San Joaquin. But we also wanted to take on popularizing the entire Diablo Range as well. So last year, we published sponsored with Bay Nature Magazine, the first supplement focusing entirely on the Diablo Range, and published the first map showing all the public lands of the Diablo Range. There are lots of experts at various pieces of the Diablo Range, but there's almost no one who's an expert about the entire 150-mile geographic feature. So this is kind of our step last year, putting it on the map, taking this blank area between Highway 101 and Highway 5, especially considering the foothills usually look somewhat featureless, grassland, geological, etc. And people don't know that when you go 5 miles in and 500 feet up, it's like Mount Diablo or Mount Hamilton multiplied. This was the Bay Nature supplement that I was mentioning, the spine of California. And we all know from Mount Diablo, Mount Hamilton, Henrico, that these are areas of incredible biodiversity, but they haven't gotten a lot of attention. If Mount Diablo or Mount Hamilton each have more than 10% of the native plants of California, what's hiding in the rest of the Diablo Range that's gotten very little attention? We protected more than 75% of what's important north of Altamont Pass, but only 24% of the entire Diablo Range has been protected otherwise. So there's a lot of blank spots on the map. There are a lot of big ranches no one's looked at, and there are a lot of areas that haven't gotten much attention. In 2013, in September, the Morgan fire happened, and over 4 days, it burned 3,000 acres. It was very geologically and botanically diverse areas that were affected, the main peaks of Mount Diablo. Soon after, we organized our Mary Bauerman Science and Research program, and we decided to focus on the burn area for the next 3 years to look at regeneration for these BioBlitzes, for small grants, in various kinds of other ways, and it was incredible. So after we, here's one of the scenes on North Peak of some of the wildflower diversity. Not unlike this year, we had kind of a dry year the first year, which meant that there wasn't that much erosion. And then for 2.5 years, Joan Hamilton did galleries and articles and posts online about the Diablo fires that turned into an audible guide called Harvest of Fire.
They're talking about.
So when the SCU fires happened, it started, and we paid attention to the 3,000 acre deer zone area in Morgan Territory, Los Vaqueros, and Round Valley to the east of Mount Diablo. The day before the fire started, I had been thinking, what's the next thing that we'll do to really focus on educating people about the Diablo Range and introducing them to it? And I was looking for fires because they're so exciting. A 30,000 acre fire had burned west of Coalinga in July. And imagine that, 10 times the size of the Morgan fire. This would be an incredible opportunity to teach people about that part of the range. The next day, the SCU fires happened. We got a similar sized fire to the Morgan fire east of the mountain in Morgan Territory, Los Vaqueros, and Round Valley. But the rest of the fire, the merging of the Canyon and the Calaveras fires, made the SCU fires the third largest in California history, 120 times the size of the Morgan fire, over 600 square miles of burned area. And so it became a picture perfect opportunity for us to do the same thing we had done back in 2013, 14, and 15, to introduce people to this area, to follow the regeneration, to focus BioBlitzes. And we called it, we began a program that we're calling Diablo Range Revealed. It's already had 4 posts that have been put up. There are more coming again next week. We planned the BioBlitz for the footprint of the SCU fire. And we did it in a dispersed way because we didn't quite know whether we would be able to get people together as we have for past BioBlitzes. What we knew was that no matter what we did, we would find a lot of stuff. We didn't realize we would find as much as we have. And we didn't know it would be as successful as it has. And I'll tell you that the BioBlitzes next year and the following year are going to be even more incredible as we get to know areas better, as we target specific additional areas, as we find out more. What we did know was this would result in new partnerships. In the case of this BioBlitz with Henry Coe, with California Native Plant Society, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and we would find people to help us in these various areas. We knew we would go outside of our area of interest. We're in the northern 3 counties doing most of our work, but we've already helped with some of the funding for a legal challenge to a reservoir at the bottom of Del Puerto Canyon. We're looking at solar projects in various areas and so on. And so the BioBlitz was both the normal opportunity to focus on specific properties like the Conley Ranch, where I saw a roadrunner when I was up there with Malcolm and Patrick Colar and others. I'd seen another one in Contra Costa, the first record in 40 years, 10 years earlier. So I didn't get a picture of this one on Conley Ranch. That was one of my favorite sightings of the 2-week period. And what I basically wanted to say was there are a few things we learned. The regeneration is happening slowly. In the grassland, especially on the west side, faster, on the east side, slower. And instead of 3 to 5 years, we may have 4 to 6 or 7 years of regeneration because it's happening slower than it did after the Morgan fire. And so we're going to continue to focus on this area, introduce people to it in various ways, and hope that you'll stay tuned and stay involved. The other lesson that I kind of learned from this, which you'll hear about from Denise next, is it was so attractive to spend time in that 400,000 acre area from Corral Hollow South that I personally neglected Morgan Territory, Round Valley, and Los Vaqueros, a 3,000 acre equal to the Morgan fire. And so I'm telling you, pay attention to that area in the future. There's a lot in that steep ridgeline connection between the 3 parks that no one has looked at since 1945. And just a few people are starting to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seth. And I'm next. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Cool. So I'm here to talk about fire poppies. The first week of St. Mount Diablo's 2021 BioBlitz started off with a really exhilarating find, the fire poppy. As part of the BioBlitz, members of St. Mount Diablo's land team, including myself, Sean Burke, Roxana Lucero, and Haley Sutton, we went out the first week to explore different regions of the Deer Zone fire, which includes Round Valley Regional Preserve, Morgan Territory Regional Preserve, and the Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And we got to see firsthand both the destruction and the post-fire regeneration of the land. And it's truly amazing to see how plants and animals and fungi come back from this kind of natural disaster. So the burn sites that we visited varied both in degree of destruction and regeneration. Sites that were in lower elevations were more shaded, near riparian areas were already covered in about 1 to 2 feet tall grasses and thistles, and a beautiful variety of wildflowers. The areas that involved a steep climb were more exposed to the sun and mostly chaparral before the fire hit, were covered in swaths of burnt, fallen trees and lots of bare ground. So on the rugged, steep, rocky slopes, after about 1,000-foot climb, we stumbled upon never before recorded sites of fire poppies, Papaver californicum. And it was a pretty awesome moment because we're on this steep slope. We've got about 30, 40 mile per hour gusts of wind blowing dust in our faces and the sun starting to set when we see something bright orange in the distance. And I was skeptical because we passed by so much orangish poison oak and claytonia, but this one seemed to be higher off the ground on a thin stalk, and turns out it was fire poppies. We can see here on this picture, which I took, the whitish base at each petal and the disc-like sessile stigma. And we also found many wind poppies nearby, which look pretty similar to the fire poppies, but wind poppies have a dark purplish base at each petal and a stigma that's on a distinct style. The fire poppies are an annual herb and endemic to California. They also tend to appear only after a fire. So the seeds actually need a smoke-derived cue to start germinating. The blooms don't last very long, maybe a day or two, but the flowers are usually a gorgeous, vivid orange, and you can see it from a distance. It's been at least several decades since the deer zone area last burned, and that's Round Valley Regional Preserve and Morgan Territory and Los Vaqueros. So who knows when the last time these fire poppies actually bloomed. The seeds will lie dormant for years until they receive their cue from smoke. So far, fire poppies have been a rare gem in the SCU Lightning Complex fire footprint, with no other observations having been made, at least not on iNaturalist, for this region. So this is also the first record of fire poppies ever in the Morgan Territory, Round Valley, and Los Vaqueros area. And it's just really fortunate that these spectacular ridges are protected by the East Bay Regional Park District and the Contra Costa Water District. And hopefully we'll be seeing more fire poppy blooms in the next 2 to 3 years. And just a quick shout out to San Juan Diablo's 2-week BioBlitz for giving the land team an opportunity to make multiple trips out to the SCU Lightning Complex fire footprint. In doing so, letting us find these cool blooms, including tons of whispering bells and Mount Diablo fairy lanterns, which are just gorgeous. And that's fire poppies. Up next, we have Matthew Cover, Professor of Ecology of California State University, Stanislaus. Take it away, Matthew.
Hey, everybody. It's nice to see you. Let's try that. All right, you can see my screen here.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we see a lot of pictures.
Perfect. Oh, a lot of pictures. Oh, God. You'd think I'd doing this all day long for the past year. I'd be better. Share screen. All right, see a dragonfly now?
Yes, we do.
All right. And in the chat, just in case, this is a link to the Google Slides if you want to follow along or you just want to check it out after the fact. So I'm just going to briefly talk a little about some of my observations in Del Puerto Canyon. I've been going out here for a few years now, and so I thought, hey, this was a great chance to compare before and after this fire. And this is probably the most striking organism I saw, the Pacific clubtail, kind of a rare dragonfly in these parts. So here's a view on the left, 2019, Del Puerto Canyon, just looking upstream from where North Fork of Del Puerto Creek enters the canyon. And on the right is the view from last week. So these are just about 2 years apart. And you can see on the right, definitely some evidence of the SCU fire, especially on that slope on the right. A lot of burned pines and some burned oaks. But for the most part, the riparian zone in this section of the creek, and at least along a lot of the canyon that I viewed, was in pretty good shape. We'll just do a little comparison of kind of some panoramic videos. This is from 2019 of this section of the canyon and panning up to where the North Fork enters behind that juniper. And the same view, oh, sorry, that was 2019. Here we go, same view, 2021. You can see all the evidence of the burned pines on the hill slopes, getting down pretty close to the edge of the riparian zone. So I was curious what effect, if any, this might have on the stream itself. This is getting down into the canyon on the left. 2 years ago with some Stan State students. On the right, the present day, you can see this large cottonwood doing fine, but the smaller cottonwood was actually burned during the fire. So the fire getting right up to the edge of the riparian zone, which is a pretty unusual experience for fires affecting California streams. So what did I find? Is a little video of some of the bugs in the stream. And 80% of what you see here are mayflies, Batis mayflies, the larger invertebrates there are damselfly nymphs. There's some Polycenthropus caddisflies, a water penny beetle, one of my favorites. Take-home point was, in terms of species richness and community composition, very few changes at all from what I've observed at the site in previous years. All of these taxa listed here are basically represent the community at this site that I've seen in previous years. I think what makes this site particularly, important from a conservation perspective is that this is one of those rare perennial streams in the inner Coast Range. And so it houses a lot of species that are pretty rare distributions throughout the Diablo Range, including in the upper right, this photo of Pteronarcis californica, a stonefly that my students are presenting at a conference next week. More and more evidence suggesting that some of these populations in Del Puerto, as well as over in Coyote Creek, are maybe a unique species from the rest of the Pteronarcis californica populations further to the north and east. I also spent a little time up in the North Fork. So the view on the left, 2019, the view in 2021, again, burn getting down pretty close right into the canyon. As you can see, some of the riparian vegetation got burned. But in terms of hydrology, water quality, things are pretty similar to what I've seen in the system in the past. Typically, the North Fork dries up in the late spring. May, June, it becomes a series of isolated pools, and usually by July, it's completely dry. I have to show my favorite insect. If you saw my presentation a few years back at the Mary Bauerman speaker series, this is Neohermes filicornis. It's a helgramite. Looks like the video is freezing up a little bit. See if I can jump ahead there. This species is one of those characteristic species of temporary streams in the Diablo Range. Not sure why we're getting held up here, but anyway, we'll skip ahead because I've got another picture of it on the next slide. On the right, Neohermes filicornis. On the left, stonefly, Baumanella alameda. Really, these two taxa, I think, are two of the most characteristic aquatic insects of temporary streams, the Diablo Range, and they were very common in the North Fork as that stream was drying up. So really, my take home just from these brief observations in terms of water quality and hydrology and the aquatic invertebrate assemblage, I saw very little impacts that I could relate to the fire. Really good sign. There's a link down at the bottom. A few years ago, my students, as we were learning about the possibilities of the dam on Lower Del Puerto Canyon, a few students in my freshwater ecology class put together a website that has some of the field observations we'd made. So a link there if you want to check that out. And always happy for questions. Email mcover@csustan.edu. Always happy to talk aquatic bugs. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cover. Next up, we have Sean Burke, Land Programs Director of Save Mount Diablo, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this time it's not as smooth. Let's see.
Thanks, Denise. So yeah, on August 15th, 2020, I was walking out of Salt Point State Park after a day of climbing and saw some pretty serious thunderclouds kind of brewing in the north. And, definitely they caught my attention. That when you see things like that in the summertime, they're no joke. Yet somehow on August 16th, I slept through the event on the top bunk on my Westphalia van again and missed the lightning strikes. Driving home that day, I started receiving text messages that our board member, Margaret Cruz's cake bread branch was starting to be affected by fires created by lightning. And right away, I knew I had slept through a pretty incredible event. And it was time to start doing some studying. And slowly yet surely, the SCU Lightning Fire Complex became what it became, 400,000 acres. And being that Morgan Territory, Round Valley, and Los Vaqueros area are close to where I live here in Concord and are a frequented area, the Deer Zone fire was definitely an area that really caught my attention as an area of interest. And also knowing the incredible biodiversity that it had already, I knew it would be a great hotspot for us to kind of focus in for our BioBlitz and start to try to understand the effects of this fire on such a unique habitat so close to home in the Mount Diablo area. So I'll talk a little bit about that 3,000 acre fire and my experiences there. As Denise mentioned, on an incredible day out there, we saw a lot of real rare wildflowers. For months, we began kind of exploring the area. And basically, as soon as we were allowed to get into the area at all, I began taking photos for baselines to compare to the future of this study, not even knowing the study would happen. I noticed vaporized manzanitas that I had become acquainted with over the years, huge manzanitas, extremely thick, rich soils covered in ash, really bright red soils, cleared out valleys underneath these lush oak canopies, yet the oaks would, for the most part, were protected. So I thought that was a real interesting thing, and it really drew my attention. And the thing that really caught my attention the most, as I mentioned earlier, is I'm a climber, and going into Round Valley, looking up at the hillside, going into Morgan Territory, all of a sudden, this area that was totally covered in trees, that looked like a monoculture of oak trees for the longest time, was a barren, steep, Tuolumne-esque talus field with slabs of rock, and it really caught my attention. I really had to learn more about it and start to study it. So when BioBlitz came, we had some questions about what we would see, being that we only had 5 inches of rainfall in the last year. But our questions were very quickly answered. As we started looking in the area, we saw tens of thousands of fairy lanterns. And for years, I worked as a park ranger on the mountain, and I'd see maybe a couple hundred a year, and that would be an incredible year. This year, no exaggeration, probably saw somewhere around 30 to 40,000 fairy lanterns just in Round Valley and Morgan Territory alone. This photo is a representation of that. These beautiful flowers basically just popped out of every nook and cranny you can imagine in the hillside there. And it really seemed as if these wildflowers that were bulbs really got a chance to really flourish. And maybe they were seeds in the seed bank before. This was their first shot. They really got a chance to show themselves. And that was true. And we saw other wildflowers in the area like blue dicks, tens of thousands of owl clovers, ethereal spears, all up and down the hillside there. There were stump sprouters of manzanitas, toyons, black sages, chamise. Manroot was definitely one of the first to show, and it was spread out everywhere. I mean, you might look at the slope dead on and kind of just see what seems like a real high intensity fire. But when you get onto it, much like Wes's photo, you start to see these manroot patches spreading out, these star lilies peppered in places. And it's a pretty incredible landscape. And it's slow to regenerate. But the amazing thing is that a lot of these really incredible natives are starting to show themselves, like, you know, this patch of fire poppies we saw. We did see a handful of whispering bells as well in that area, which is incredible. I'd never seen those before. And just last week, I saw a singular golden eardrop on the in the area near where the fire poppies were. So that was incredibly exciting. As far as wildlife was concerned in the area, all the important telltale signs of wild boar are definitely still seen. They're putting in incredible trails. It almost looks as if they were built by humans. The wild boars and the pigs are definitely creating fairways through this area. And it's incredible to know that they're still alive, although the pigs are an issue. We definitely saw golden eagles and a bald eagle fly through in that amount of time, prairie falcons, peregrine falcons, lots of swallowtail butterflies, which was an amazing sight to see, as well as acorn woodpeckers. But it's a real incredible place to go explore. I really recommend going to explore it. It's so close to home. There's so much going on there, and it's going to be changing for years. And the lack of rain that we had this year is just going to slow that down, but also extend that period where we have time to make some really incredible observations. And talking with my friends who are firefighters on the line, through that, they all looked at it as the perfect scenario for a prescribed burn that they'd been wanting to be a part of for years. So that's incredible to see and to hear and to experience. So that's it for the deer zone aspect of my excursions. I also spent a lot of time in Del Puerto Canyon this past year, and that's another absolutely mind-blowing area that a real high intensity fire raged through. And we started exploring that in December, and right away we went to the ridge tops, of course, and started seeing stump sprouters. And it seems as if, this is December, there are some, high hanging clouds in the area, and we were seeing black sage and chamise already sprouting in some of these stumps, which we thought was really incredible. We also saw a handful of Datura rhytii starting to come back, so that was exciting. Ravens and eagles were all over the place, which is another really great thing to see. Coyotes, deers. And then February went back and explored some more, and explored the Menhir Deus area. And again, the wildfire was obvious. It was extreme in some places, but at the same time, we were seeing stump sprouters and manroot coming back, starting to repair some of these really incredible soil types, these serpentine soils. One of my favorite finds in that particular trip was some cauliflower mushroom, which I hadn't seen in real life. I'd been looking for it in the coast, and then I found it in Del Puerto Canyon, so that was exciting. Fast forward to BioBlitz. I made an excursion out there with Seth and Denise, and right away we were seeing lots and lots and lots of wildflowers. I mean, thousands of mosquito bills, whole fields covered in that. Tufted poppies were definitely a wildflower that were covering hillsides. Painted or Indian paintbrush, chia wildflowers, Gilia, as well as serpentine, Lepto, Siphon, Claytonias. I mean, it was pretty incredible to see, and it was definitely a 2 to 4 day kind of flush that we experienced as we started to seek. Because 2 days after that experience I just explained, I went back with my wife from Highway 5, and we did the full 22-mile drive. And again, from the other aspects, we were seeing hillsides covered in tufted poppies. Manroot was definitely another common first plant, if you will, to see coming back in these primordial time slopes. Chamise, Toyon, Manzanitas, skullcaps were starting to pop up all over the place. Thousands of cow fields kind of going along with the concept of some of these little bulbs really starting to thrive as a result of the fire. And it just really was an exciting thing. A week or so later, we came back, and there had been another cycle over, and we were seeing butterfly mariposa lilies coming along a lot of these hillsides. It really is just one of these places that's constantly changing, and it's important to get out and see these things as they change, because these are fleeting moments, fleeting images of a primordial time. And so it's a very exciting thing. And, as we look down into the canyon, as we just saw, the creek itself is still flowing, and a lot of these incredible cottonwood trees, the older ones, really were able to endure this. And kind of the incredible thing about these cottonwoods is, if you think back, some of these things are hundreds of years old. They were there, before the Spanish came. And just kind of thinking back and seeing what they endured, seeing the fires that they'd endured, and seeing that source of life rage through the canyon, that the creek there, it's an incredible thing. It's an incredible place. So very interested to see how the years go on with exploring this area in particular. And yeah, I recommend everybody get out to that area and see it while they can. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ward, Professor of Entomology at the University of California, Davis.
Thank you, Denise. And I'll just share my screen here. Can you all see that? Yes? So this will be a little bit different. Just the results of a brief ant survey at Henry Coe State Park, and we did not get into the burned zone. So think of this as more like sort of baseline data about the ant community in an area that did get burned. About 2 weeks ago, I sort of carried out, you might call, an ant BioBlitz at Henry Coe, accompanied by 2 of my graduate students, Jill Oberski and Zach Grivenow, and Marav Vonchek, a local environmentalist, and 2 of her colleagues. So it's great to have 6 pairs of eyes looking for ants. We saw more that way as a result, I think. And I'll just give you then a very brief summary of what we saw there and maybe make a few remarks about possible effects of the fire. Okay. So we were on foot, so we couldn't get as far as the burned area, but we basically explored for half a day Pine Ridge from Manzanita Point to Cole Monument. And that sort of search produced 20 species of ants belonging to 10 genera. And certain genera were quite well represented, like Camponotus, Chromatic Aster, and Temnothorax, each with multiple species. And we found several ants that are of some interest, so I will talk about them in a second. One point was that during the survey, we saw no non-native or exotic ants. This is relevant because, as an earlier speaker pointed out, non-native ants can be somewhat destructive environmentally. They not only eliminate native species of ants, but also have knock-on effects on other elements in the flora and fauna, such as the Argentina ant, for example, adversely affecting horned toads. So horned lizards. So it was good that we didn't find any introduced ants, but of course, this was just over a limited area that we surveyed. So let's just look at a few of the more interesting ants that we encountered. Here's a cutie. This is Pseudomax Apache, the Apache twig ant. It nests in dead wood or dead branches of manzanita, oak, and other woody plants. And this belongs to a genus that's predominantly neotropical. So most species in the genus Pseudomax live in Central and South America. And here we have a northern outlier, Pseudomax apache, occurring in Northern California. So it's kind of an interesting creature. These guys are quite attractive orange ants with big eyes, and they move very quickly, very suddenly. They have good vision, and they quickly can move out of your sight. This ant, as I said, is often seen on Manzanita. And I should just put a shout out here to Manzanita. Manzanita is really a kind of keystone species for California ants, because a whole distinctive suite of ant species either nests in and or forages on Manzanita. So it's really an important plant, and we found a number of distinctive members of this Manzanita community, ant species that is, during the survey a couple of weeks ago, and that was one of them, Pseudomax apache. Here's another ant we found on Manzanita. Camponotus Yogi is a kind of carpenter ant that nests in dead wood or dead stumps. The soldier of this species has a plug-shaped head, which it uses to block the nest entrance. You can see that here. This is a soldier ant. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but I'm pointing out that little plug-shaped head there that blocks the nest entrance. This is not a very common ant. It's, for example, on iNaturalist, there's only one observation of this species, period. So it was rather nice to encounter it. It's kind of an interesting thing to see. This was a worker foraging on Manzanita. Another carpenter ant that we found was Campanotus Dumatorum. This species is pretty common in Southern California, but it's reaching its northern limit here in Northern California. We found this in Chemise Chaparral at Manzanita Point, and it's just about the northern limit of this ant. It's found at Mount Diablo as well, but not north of Carquina Strait. Another ant reaching perhaps its southern limit here, at least in the Coast Range, that we encountered is a species of velvety tree ant called Lamatian luctuosum. This nests in dead wood, especially that of pine trees, and it's a relative of a much more common species of velvety tree ant that many people are probably familiar with, Lamatian occidentale. So that species was also at Henrico, but this one, a relative of occidentale, is not very common in the Bay Area. You find it much more in the Sierra Nevada, in the North Coast Range. It's probably reaching its southern limit in the Coast Range here, and it's quite likely that the stands of ponderosa pine favor its occurrence in Henrico. Here's another interesting ant we encountered. Chromatic Aster mutans is a kind of acrobat ant, I guess would be the common name for members of the genus Chromatic Aster. We encountered this in Chaparral at Manzanita Point under stones. This is not a frequently observed ant. There are only a handful of records, for example, on AntWeb or an iNaturalist. So it seems to be uncommon, although it may be mistaken for another common species, Chromatic Aster coarctata. This species, Chromatic Aster mutans, is thought to be a temporary social parasite of congener, namely the common species Chromatic Aster coarctata. What that means is that colony-founded queens of Chromatic Aster mutans are thought to enter colonies of this other species, assassinate the queen, and then use the worker force as a boost to get their colony going. That's called temporary social parasitism. And that's one of the more interesting ants we found at Henry Co. So in summary, this was a very brief survey, just a 1 day, a 10-hour brief wander over Pine Ridge. And we encountered already 20 species, including a number that are of considerable interest, as I just pointed out. The total number of ant species in Henry Co should well be more than this, probably in the order of 40 or 50 ant species. Mount Diablo State Park, for example, which I've surveyed much more extensively, has about 48 ant species. So we would expect a similar number at Henry Co. So there's certainly more work to be done surveying the ant fauna of this area. Again, I'll repeat that we did not observe non-native ant species during our brief survey, so they seem to be absent, but this should be confirmed with further work at other locations, particularly the entrances at the south end that are at a lower elevation. And finally, I'm afraid I don't have any information to give you on the effects of the SU lightning complex fire on the ant community because we didn't get that far. We were confined to this area near the park headquarters, so that's something that remains to be investigated. If you're interested in ants, my last slide just gives you some publications and websites where you can get more information. I guess I'm being sort of a proselytizer here. So if you like, I guess if this is available through Denise, you can address this. You can look at this slide for more information about ants. And that's actually all I have for today.
Thank you so much. And we actually have a question about ants coming up now that we're at our Q&A.
Okay.
Do Argentine ants have any type of relationship, good or bad, with manzanitas?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes. They certainly have a relationship because when Argentine ants invade an area, they do like to forage on manzanita because manzanita provides, of course, nectar from its blossoms in the spring. And then later on manzanita, you often see populations of scale insects, which the Argentine ants will tend. So yes, Argentine ants will, if they invade an area, they'll be very interested in manzanita. Unfortunately, that's not good for the native ants, of course, because the native ants use manzanita as well. So the relationship, does it benefit manzanita? It's hard to say because although the tending of the blossoms might cause the Argentine ants to deter herbivores, the tending of the scale insects is probably not a good thing. So it's probably a mixed bag for the manzanita, and it's certainly a bad situation for native ants when Argentine ants are there.
Thank you so much. And we have a couple more questions.
How to photograph ants for ID on iNaturalist? Okay, well, certainly the features of the ant that are important often involve that little waist-like area between the apparent thorax and the apparent abdomen. We call it the petiole, or the petiole and the postpetiole. So if you get a good shot of the petiole or the postpetiole, that's useful because that will help with identification. There's also just, get as close as you can. Ants are tiny or medium to small creatures. Just get as close of a shot as you can. I've looked at a number of records on iNaturalist and discovered some misidentifications because I could correctly identify the ant from the photograph. In other cases, it's too ambiguous. You just can't tell. I'm a taxonomist, so I don't actually so much photograph ants as I collect them and I take them back to my lab and I process them and I point mount them and I study them and sometimes I sequence their DNA. So we take pictures of dead ants, but those live ant pictures on iNaturalist are wonderful. So I just encourage people to keep doing that and get as close up a shot as you can. Do Argentine ants damage the roots of plants in the area they're located in? Not sure about that. That is done by fire ants, both native and introduced, will cause damage to the roots of plants. So the native fire ant here, Solenopsis xylani, will do that. I don't know if Argentine ants cause root damage to plants.
We're going to kind of open this up to the rest of the crowd, and since there are only 44 people here, we may be able to actually have people ask to have your mic turned on, and if you've got questions for any of the speakers, or comments about the BioBlitz or this presentation, turn on your mic or ask Denise to turn it on. I'm not sure how it's working on this. And or you can put a question into the chat box and we'll check there as well. My experience with Zoom is, other than a few in the chat box, we don't get that many questions, but this is a specialized crowd. Anybody got a question?
Well, we have one in the chat. Do you think the fires may have set Argentine ant populations back or in combination with drought?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, Argentine ants are ground nesting, and ground nesting ants aren't so adversely affected by fire. I was going to mention that probably the ground nesting ants will be not too unhappy with the fires as long as the vegetation comes back. Arboreal ants, of course, are completely decimated by fires. So those ants nesting in Manzanita are completely killed off. Argentine ants probably, if the area dries out, will decline in numbers a little bit because they need summer moisture. So that's why our chaparral and oak woodlands are generally not invaded by Argentine ants, because there's no summer water. If we irrigate or if we put in stock ponds, or if it's along a stream, that's where the Argentine ant will do well. So the fires might cause a slight decline, but it would be temporary.
I think we skipped Alan Bade. Alan, do you want to, we're going to stop your sharing, Professor Ward, and let Alan Bade do his brief presentation.
Can you see my, am I muted?
No, you're not muted.
Okay. And can you see my screen? I'm gonna, I don't really have a,
there you go.
Let's see.
We're looking at the top of a Microsoft window.
Okay. I don't really have a presentation prepared, but what I was really interested in comparing the area of the Morgan fire where Wendy and I hiked on the 29th and to the area along, in the deer fire zone. So we went to the fire zone on the eastern side of Morgan Territory. And I thought it was really interesting to compare because we've been hiking up the east slope of Mount Diablo regularly and finding interesting birds there that we don't see in the same quantity in other areas. So first, I thought I'd just quickly show you a couple of stump sprouting and landscape pictures from the Morgan Territory area that we went to, which I thought was really interesting. There was, like others mentioned, there's the wind poppies. With others mentioned that the fire was really spotty in its effects.
Alan, we're still just seeing your menu of a whole bunch of photos.
Oh, okay. Let me, let me try this again. Okay. I'm gonna down that, and then.
Maybe you're sharing the wrong screen.
I am sharing the wrong screen. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
So there's a, this was in Perkins Canyon. And we've seen quite a few phainopeplas on the east slope of the burn area of where the fire in 2013 was for the last few years. So I'm really curious whether or not that is due to just the isolation of that area and the fact that not a lot of birders bird there, or is it a response to the fire there? So I'm curious about comparing that and looking at the Morgan Territory area and seeing if we see more phainopeplas and perhaps even some bell sparrows move in, because bell sparrows seem to like more burned chaparral that's a little more open. We haven't found bell sparrows on the east side of the Morgan fire area yet either, but we're looking forward to seeing that. And now I'm going to just show you some of this, if you can see this now, the stump sprouting is that coming through now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is our walk along the Morgan Territory area. And it was pretty interesting to see the stump sprouting and how spotty the fire was. And I thought it was very interesting in the chaparral zone where you'd have this complete burn and then a hard line and then not so burned. And this is probably the area, looking over at the area where Denise and Sean were. And here you can really see how it burned almost completely and then, you know, relatively intact chaparral there. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if we see perhaps some bell sparrows coming into that area. These are flowers in the deer zone grasslands. The oak woodlands, the trees were scorched, but the foliage was coming back. The calcortus, I'm really curious if the calcortus was young bulbs that went for it with the fire punch of all the nutrients, because I think that the seeds actually, from seedlings, it takes a few years for the bulbs to develop to the point where they can produce flowers. At least that's my experience in growing calcortus in our home garden. The other interesting thing was how completely stumps would burn. I have another slide of that coming up. These manzanitas that are actually starting to sprout on their leaves. This is the Manzanita Trail in eastern Morgan Territory. Calcortus is coming straight out of the ash. And then we found a couple of these for kind of fun to find. I see Denise is using that as her screen when she's lots of Claytonia. And then
you didn't mention that was a Diablo sunflower and endemic.
Correct. That's a Diablo sunflower endemic. And we found some of these not blooming yet. And then this one was nicely blooming. And then what was really interesting is also seeing these trees that are just going for it all over their stems, no matter, you know, leaves coming out of everything. This is a pretty completely burned area. Really burned area with a stump sprout. And then a more slightly burned area where the manzanitas are burned along the stems. And then this is looking back towards the ridge, which I believe might have been close to the ridge where Denise and Sean were. Looking east towards the reservoir. And then one thing I thought was really interesting is how the fires must have smoldered for quite some time, because we saw many trees with no stump. The trees obviously were still standing when the fire went through and was mostly out, but then continued to burn underground. And the tree fell over, and the stump was completely burned. So I think the observations that I'm looking forward to the next couple of years, this is a buckeye that was sprouting, another stump burn, and more manzanitas that were scorched. And I think that, I'm gonna stop screen sharing, but I think that what I'm really interested in is in the next few years, if we see a number of bird species that may move into the area. Round Valley has more Lewis's woodpeckers, generally speaking, than I think are seen elsewhere. I'm a relatively new birder, so I'm kind of trying to learn about these things, but the bell sparrow is of interest and the phainopepla is of interest. So we'll be watching for those as we bird in Morgan Territory. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan. And we have a couple more questions from Joel. Will you still be looking at observations made during the BioBlitz period that have not yet been uploaded to iNaturalist? And this is just directed to the Save Mount Diablo team itself?
The answer is we'll be looking at biodiversity throughout the 3 or 4 or 5 year period of regeneration. We just use the BioBlitz itself because it happens this time of year and to focus people's attention and to do a public component of it. We'll kind of rejigger things for next year's BioBlitz and have conversations about what was successful and what wasn't. And our real limitation this year was what areas could we direct people to? And we had these specific parks, but we also had these public roads where there was a lot to see just from the road. So we'll keep doing this both in season and during the BioBlitzes, and stay tuned. Keep checking Diablo Range Revealed. Most importantly, sign up for our regular e-blasts, and you'll get information about these events and about Diablo Range Revealed. Denise?
And we have one more question. In the photo titled the Porto Canyon that Seth showed, the hillside with purple flowers and poppies, what would normally be growing on that hillside if fire hadn't gone through there?
That was Sean's photo.
That's a good question. I haven't been there. I would imagine invasive grasses would probably be in that area, but I don't know for sure.
Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, sorry, Seth.
I thought some of the participants might have some specific observations like Malcolm, but one of the things we're going to see is that some places that had a minor number of observations before, like Mines Road, Del Puerto Canyon, and the Mount Hamilton Road, are going to have so many observations in the future. It's going to kind of prove the level of biodiversity for the entire area surrounding it, because so much is just being found from the roadside. Anybody have any other questions, or any of the participants have a specific observation they'd like to make? Malcolm, I thought we'd start with you.
Yeah, I do have an observation in listening to the various people and what they saw, particularly in the vegetation. It's not, I don't want to say it's striking, but it is very consistent with what we observed in the Morgan fire. The types of species that have come up into the burn zones, not, concentrating on the rarer wildflowers like fire poppy, but things like manroot and star lily, the response of the stump sprouters, chemise, toyon, the buckeye that you saw, just, luxurious foliage. We had buckeye sprouts in the Morgan fire that were 6 feet high the spring after the fire. And also we didn't hear anything about things like reseeding. Was there regeneration of some of these species that do regenerate by seed? Manzanita, Ceanothus, California sagebrush. Those are things to keep an eye on in the future, because there were spots in the Morgan fire where there was just ground was covered with seedlings. And I don't know if that was an observation that people made.
Actually,
and
Malcolm,
finally for Scott, we had band-tailed pigeons on Connolly Ranch in the hundreds, and they were all concentrated, not all, but primarily concentrated down along Corral Hollow Creek. And whether it was water or something else that was concentrating them at that location, it was surprising how many band-tails were there.
Scott, did you have an observation or a response? I will say, Malcolm, that in between 2 weeks in the same place in Morgan Territory, I went from seeing almost no Manzanita seedlings to seeing them everywhere. So we were looking for Manzanita stump sprouting and seedlings. And in the course of a week, I saw thousands.
We were also struck by the fairy lantern, how many were in the Morgan fire burn zone.
Scott?
Responding to Malcolm. We were surprised with the very large flocks of band-tailed pigeons, and a lot of them appear to be sort of grazing on the ground. And so that's why I wondered if it was possibly just easy foraging because of the acorns. But I just hadn't seen that many, and we saw them throughout the burn area. Aside from that, in the places we were, which was mostly grassland, it was you know, it was surprising how difficult it was to find the actual burn area, as I mentioned in my presentation. So, you know, it's very different depending on the location you're at and the type of habitat you're surveying in.
One of the things I'd tell people is that one of our hopes here with this whole program, as well as the BioBlitz, is that it becomes obvious just how important a hotspot of biodiversity the Diablo Range is for funding purposes, et cetera. And I'll tell you, there's a wilderness bill that's being considered to include protection for part of the Diablo Range. We've mentioned the Connolly Ranch a number of times, and we'll have a video out about Connolly Ranch next week. That's a 9,000 acre ranch where the family is trying to protect it with conservation easements, and we're trying to help them do that. And so one of the targeted parts of the BioBlitz was getting some biologists onto that property, which is very rich. I mean, 9,000 acres, 15 square miles. It's likely to be very rich, and we found lots and lots of things there beyond what they had seen in the past. And that's exactly what we're using this information for, to help further protection of specific properties as well as the whole range. Other questions? Anybody else have any observations they'd like to make?
We have a couple questions in the comments. When in an area of grassland, how can you tell if the fire has affected a particular place?
Burned bottoms of branches of trees.
And our other question is, what road could we drive on to see firsthand some of the plants coming up from after the burn?
A lot of places, the blooming season for many things is ending. Some of them are continuing, and higher elevations are continuing. On our BioBlitz 2021 webpage, we have maps for a number of public areas, as well as the public roads of Hamilton, San Antonio Valley, Del Puerto, and Mines Road, which are the single best way to both get into the heart of the Diablo Range and see the burn. And if you come in from Mount Hamilton, basically as you come over the top, you'll be in the burn. If you come from Mines Road, it's 14 miles before you get to the burn. But those unburned areas give you a sense of the baseline, and you'll start seeing the effects of the burn before long, and that'll be obvious from the trees that are affected and so on.
I have one more quick comment, if I could.
Sure.
It was also very interesting to look at this fire compared to, we drove around on dirt roads in Napa, Sonoma, and Lake counties after the big fires up there a few years ago. And we saw lots of Streptanthus growing about 2 to 3 times the normal size. And I thought that was pretty interesting. We didn't see any Streptanthus on our walks this time, but the fact that we didn't have much water, I think, really kind of affected perhaps some of what we may have seen otherwise.
If Amy Patton is on here, maybe she could respond to that. But while we're figuring out whether she's here, yeah, we saw a lot of the jewel flower after the Mount Diablo fire. One of the real questions for me that I hope one of the plant people can answer is that question about the thousands and thousands of what seemed like seedling globe lilies or tiny bulb globe lilies with their first flower. Were those seedlings, or were those tiny bulbs that were hanging out until the fire happened? Did they have so much nutrients that they, even with a low rain year, they could go from seed to bulb and first flower in their first year?
Hey, so I'll start with the Streptanthus. I would say it's probably just a bit early for them right now. I've been seeing a lot of Streptanthus Rosettes in like Henrico area, but I saw 2 in bloom last week of Streptanthus glandulosus. So I think of May as kind of like prime Streptanthus month. So I think if you keep going out in May, it'll be a good time to look for them. And they also like, kind of bare areas, rock outcroppings, bare and open soil. I have been seeing a lot of oversized plants in different burn areas, especially with like Fremont star lily, I've been seeing those that are 3 or 4 times the size normally. So, you know, when the burn comes through, it deposits a lot of nutrients in the soil. So, you know, sometimes that, I think that might kind of lead to some weird growth forms or kind of unusual type of like growth patterns we're seeing in terms of size. I feel like I've seen a few other like giant plants. I found a giant trifolium or clover that was just like super sized. So I'd say that's probably from like excess nutrients. And Seth, I'm not sure about the bulbs for the Calochortus, but I would guess it could be a combination of both. So I could look into that and write you an email later if I find out.
Yeah, we had supersizing after the Morgan fire in 2013. It's kind of the opposite in the on the furthest east part of the range shadow, where in Morgan territory around Valley we have lots of things that are undersized but large numbers of them because there's been so little rain.
Seth, on the Calochortus, like Alan, I've been growing some from seed, and with really good conditions, abundant water and nutrients, it takes at least 3 years to get to a flower. And so from a seed to a plant that's producing a flower in a year of well below average rainfall, I think is pretty unlikely.
Good to know. So thousands of globe lilies have been hanging out underneath the chaparral there, and we know they benefit from fires, but we haven't really thought of them so much as a fire follower.
And I think it's the same for the star lily, because boy, we just had slopes covered with them in the Morgan fire.
If there are no other questions, how about everybody turns on their mics and claps their hands for Denise for putting together this event.
Yay, great job,
you.
Denise.
Wow, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
And,
Thank you so much.
And Denise had a few concluding remarks.
Yes, I do. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and to all our wonderful presenters. Y'all are amazing, and I will definitely share. We're recording this entire presentation, so we'll be providing it on our BioBlitz webpage. And I also just want to share that we have, Save Mount Diablo has a Dr. Mary Bauerman Science and Research Program, and within that program, we have a grant program. And we provide researchers who are doing projects all over the Northern Diablo Range up to $2,500 in grant funding for their projects. And our next grant round will happen October 2021. So I'll be sending out that information to everyone, but keep an eye out. If you know anyone who may be interested in applying, it's a small grant, but it's really helpful still. And it doesn't take long to apply for our grant. So it's a great opportunity. And more information on that can also be found on our website. Any questions about that or anything so far? Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed all these wonderful presentations, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.